We are on page Chavches 28, and we're in the middle of the story of Rabbi Gamliel, and Rabbi Yeshua, and the other rabbis, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who took over Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Akiva, who was there at the time, and we learned a very interesting discussion about number one, if a ger, a person who's a convert from Ammon, is allowed to marry a Jewish, a regular, what can I say, a native Jewish person, or does an Ammonite need to marry a convert? And that was one discussion, one argument between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua. Of course, the original argument, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yeshua, was the argument of if Ma'ariv is a rishus or chayva, if it's a obligatory prayer or it's only a optional prayer. And then the Gemara, of course, got into this whole the story of how Rabbi Gamliel embarrassed Rabbi Yeshua. And they wanted Rabbi Akiva possibly to be the leader, to take over. And then they said, no, could be that there'll be a kapeda, some type of a negative feeling that Rabbi Gamliel will have and cause punishment. So they said Rabbi Akiva wouldn't be a good option because he doesn't have zchus avos, he doesn't have the lineage that you need in order to protect yourself from such negative feelings or negative prayers. So, maybe Rabbi Gamliel is going to try to pray to Hashem and some punishment might affect whoever takes over. So they said Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would be a good option because he has zchus avos. He comes from Hillel, and he's got a whole lineage of all the great scholars were from his lineage. They were the family of the Nasi, the family of the leader, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Gamliel, Hillel. So these are the I'm sorry, what did I just say? Rabbi Gamliel, excuse me. There's two. That's one family of yichus is the Nasi, but I'm talking about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. I'm sorry, I've sidetracked. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is a big yichus because he comes from the 10th generation of Ezra, and so he's got a huge yichus there with Ezra, who was the leader of the Jewish people when they came back to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, to build the second Beis Hamikdash. So he has the yichus of Ezra. So we said that would be an option to hire Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. It's interesting. They said also you can't hire Rabbi Yeshua because Rabbi Yeshua was a Baal HaMaaseh. He's a person who's involved in the argument, and it would either be too painful to Rabbi Gamliel if Rabbi Yeshua gets the job now, or it would look like Rabbi Yeshua argued with Rabbi Gamliel in order to get the job, and that also wouldn't look good. Yes, Robert.
I found, I located on 28A, it says the raised 2. That is what I find interesting, and probably the only time it has. It says Rabbi Akiva said to the rabbis, lock the doors so that the servants of Rabbi Gamliel do not come and harass the rabbi. So this
we're just up to that. We didn't do that yet.
Okay, thank you. I just
wait a moment. Yeah, we're just up to that story, that part of the story. So in any event, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is offered this position. He goes and he asks his household. He asks his wife, and his wife says, "Well, they might get rid of you just like they got rid of Rabbi Gamliel." Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, "Who cares? At least if you have a fancy cup, use it. Even though it's going to break tomorrow, use it today." So she said, "But you also don't have white hair, and they're not going to respect you if you don't look old. You don't look old enough." He was 18 years old. He wasn't that old. And she said to him, "You're too young. They're not going to respect you." And so a miracle happened, and he got 18 rows of white hair. And that's the story in the Haggadah. Harei ani keven shivim shana. He says, I am like I'm 70 years old, but he wasn't 70 years old. And there's a famous Rambam. There's a statement of the Rambam that explains that he studied Torah with such energy and such effort that he actually
fervor word, right?
Good. That he actually caused his hair to grow naturally white. And all the commentaries ask on the Rambam that our Gemara says it was a miracle. How could you make it into more of a natural phenomena that his hair turned white when it's really, the Gemara says clearly, Israchesh le Nisa, a miracle happened. And so they try to come up with some answers, but I'm just mentioning it because it's an interesting a point that the Rambam tries to understand it scientifically, how his hair turned white. But in any event, the Gemara then says that they when they hired Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, they removed the guard and all of a sudden there was they had to add 400 benches or 700 benches, and so it says Rabbi Gamliel became like he started feeling bad, like maybe he did the wrong thing. So I once heard a question on this, that why did he feel bad? He knew that he was kicking people out and didn't let people who weren't teicham kebaram. He wasn't letting people who weren't so sincere and honest and righteous and refined. He didn't let them come to the Beis Medrash. So he knew that he was locking people out. Why was he so hurt when Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah changed the rules and changed the policy and allowed people to come? He knew that he wasn't allowing people in. So why would he be sad when he saw that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah changed the policy and they added all these benches? Of course they're going to add benches. He was forcefully not allowing people. He had a guy at the gate telling people not to come or not allowing them to come, depending on how you learn. And so why was he so sad? And the answer that I heard was that Rabbi Gamliel, when he saw them come in to the Beis Medrash, he didn't feel bad. When he saw that they came in and they were learning, and even though they started out not being so refined and righteous and good character, but when he saw that they studied Torah and they changed, that's when he became hurt and pained. He said, I see it actually works, that if they learn Torah, it actually will have an effect on them, and they ultimately change. And that's when he felt very bad that he locked the doors and didn't let them come in. Because initially he didn't feel bad because they're not teicham kebarim, they're not righteous people. But when he saw that they were making a dent in them, the Torah was actually affecting them and making them, refining them and making them more righteous. Then he said, "Oh, I think I made a big mistake," and he felt really bad. And Hashem made a miracle that he would that he saw in a dream that he had these pictures of that they looked nice on the outside, but they were filled with ashes in the inside, which meant that don't feel bad. It's what they're not teicham kebarim. They're not really righteous, and don't feel bad. And your opinion was a valid opinion. I saw in the commentaries that they mentioned that Rabbi Gamliel's opinion was similar to Beis Shammai, that although it's not accepted according to halacha nowadays, we always follow Beis Hillel. Nevertheless, Beis Shammai's opinion is a true and correct view, just not in this world, not now. When Mashiach comes, it says the halacha will follow Beis Shammai. So it's correct. It's a true opinion, and somewhere in Shamayim, in heavens, in one of the worlds, in heavenly realms, his view is accepted. But in this world, in the physical world that we live in, the halacha follows Beis Hillel and doesn't follow Beis Shammai. And therefore, similar to Rabban Gamliel, Rabban Gamliel was a similar, his opinion of Toichai Kabaroi, that a person has to be righteous and refined before they learn Torah. That opinion is not the accepted opinion, although it is a valid view in some realm, in the some level. Yes, Susan.
I want to just quickly, this is 200 CE or 500 CE. That's what we're.
No, we're actually in the time of Rabbi Akiva, somewhere around 100.
100.
Well, no, yeah. Well, I'm sorry. Maybe 150 even. Yeah, 100, 150. See, somewhere after the destruction. The destruction happened in the year 70, and Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Gamliel. We're dealing with somewhere after, maybe in the second century. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Correct. So the Gemara then continues with the story. Oh, it also mentions that Idias, the tractate Idias, was studied, but when they had all these students come to the Beis Medrash, they brought out such great insights in the development of halacha that they were able to actually finalize the verdict on many areas that were unclear, that were cloudy. They were able to clarify them, and that happened that day. And even Rabban Gamliel came to the Beis Medrash. Even he came to the Beis Medrash, and he got into this debate with Rabbi Yeshua regarding this ger, the convert from Ammon. And Rabbi Gamliel had a good source. His source was a verse in last week's parsha that you're not allowed to marry an Ammon convert is not allowed to marry a regular Jewess. And Rabbi Yeshua countered him and said that Sancheirav, he exiled many nations and made the whole world into exile, so to speak. And he took people from this country, brought them to another country, and he relocated all these different nations. And therefore, we don't know who's an Ammonite, who's a real Ammonite, because the Ammonites of before have been relocated. And Rabbi Yeshua had a good claim. But Rabbi Gamliel had a counterclaim. Rabbi Gamliel said, well, even if they were relocated, but they came back, because there's a promise in the prophets that they're going to return. The Ammonites will return. And of course, every prophecy comes true. So of course, they returned. So Rabbi Yeshua countered that by saying, what about us, the Jewish people? We haven't returned. We have the 10 tribes haven't returned. We haven't fully returned. So ultimately, he said that even though it's a promise from the prophets, but it still hasn't happened yet, and therefore Sancheirav, he relocated all these countries. They haven't returned yet, and therefore whoever comes from Ammon today is not necessarily a real Ammonite, and we assume they come from the majority, and the majority of people are not Ammonites. Called the parish meruba parish. It's a famous line in the Gemara. Whoever separates from the majority. We always assume it comes from the majority, and therefore we assume that they're not from the nation called Ammon, and therefore they would be allowed to marry a Jewish, a Jewess, a regular Jewess that's not a convert, that was born to, it's called kahal, part of the regular native congregation. And then the Gemara said that they permitted him. And Rabbi Gamliel felt bad. He wanted to ask forgiveness from Rabbi Yeshua. He went to his house and he told Rabbi Yeshua, he says, it seems like you are a coal miner, a blacksmith. You deal with coal. Your walls of your house are black. And Rabbi Yeshua sort of answered back to him. He says, woe to a generation that you don't know how painful, how hard it is to make a living, the scholars, how they struggle. And then he asked him to forgive him, and Rabbi Yeshua did not want to forgive Rabban Gamliel until he said, in the merit of my father. And the question is what he meant by that, the merit of my father. One explanation is he meant in the merit of Hillel, or another explanation, the merit of Rabban Gamliel. In other words, his grandfather. The different explanations what he referred to, that
Rabbi,
that in the merit of his father he should forgive him. Yes.
it's similar to what we do with Hashem. We say in the merit of our forefathers, do this and that for us.
Right. True. We need all the merits we can get.
Right.
And that's why you got to be good so that your children and grandchildren will be able to have merits.
Yeah.
Got to have them. We need to have the merits. So that's the story here. So he says in the merit of his father, he should forgive him. And now we're up to this Gemara. So we're going to start here.
Rabbi, I have
Yes.
a question. Yeah, regarding this whole thing with Ammon and Moab, the fact that they got scrambled around didn't eliminate Hashem's mitzvah of Ammon and Moab not entering into the congregation. It's just that they weren't able to apply it because they didn't exactly know who was Ammon and who was Moab, right?
You're right.
So my question is, if that's the case, we have this certain feeling towards Ammon and Moab and Midian and Amalek, which sort of does it counteracts Rabbi
Yeshua.
Rabbi Sax's thing, his Devar Torah, about not harboring hatred towards anyone, no matter even in the Egyptians. We shouldn't harbor hatred. And even in the descendants of Edom or Esau, we shouldn't harbor hatred. But at the same time, we do harbor hatred towards Ammon, Moab, Midian, Amalek. So together with his Devar Torah and this thing about Ammon and Moab, it made me think about people that we do harbor hatred towards, like Amalek or Midian and Moab, because of the evil that they did to the Yidden. Even if they're mixed around and we don't know exactly how to apply it, the mitzvah is still there.
I don't think it's hatred. I think it's to not follow or not to allow their actions to come in and influence us.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
So the article of Rabbi Sachs from last week, I must say, was a very unclear of how to exactly apply it, because how does it fit? It's also it seems to contradict number. There are a number of places in the Torah that don't seem to fit with it exactly. To what extent? Is that the real meaning of his main point was about the Egyptians, not to have anger towards the Egyptians, even though they caused us a lot of suffering, but we want to move forward, which it's not so simple, because the reason that's given that is because we're supposed to show gratitude to them. That's why we weren't supposed to loisasa'iv mitzri, not to despise the Egyptians and let them marry in. So, in other words, the entire article of Rabbi Sachs was really based on the idea of against hatred, but at the same time he based it on that verse, and the verse didn't really fit exactly, because the reason to show some appreciate, to have some and not to have such negative actions against the Egyptians is because we have an obligation to show them some gratitude, because they did let us initially stay in their land. They let us move into their land, and we lived there for many years. So it has to do with gratitude, really not to have anger. That, in other words, that's not the real reason. So I think he was just like, sort of like basing it a little, and having you see it hinted to in that verse, the concept of not having hatred, not living with hatred, and that it's not so healthy. But I don't know if he used, I don't know if that's a real good source. You get what I'm saying? So the same, in other words, we definitely have areas where we don't, we're not allowed to marry Amalek. Yeah, we're supposed to have a certain hatred for Amalek. We're supposed to destroy them and not forgive them, and so on. So, it's more the idea of being able to move forward, I think, was his main point. But again, it's not so simple. It's not a simple, as I brought up also when we talked about Rabbi Sachs's insight about, so what does that mean about the Holocaust? How do we look at the, how are we supposed to look at the Germans? Do we? It wasn't a simple essay, and I'm not sure how comfortable I am to go and defend it. But it brought up an interesting point, but I'm not sure how exactly it fits perfectly in the puzzle. Okay.
Yeah, when I was reading about Ammon and Moab over here, it made me think about, wait a second, that doesn't apply in his Devar Torah and Midian.
Right. So yeah, good point, David. Okay, and thank you, Ruvain, for also trying to explain it. It's give some clarity to it. Okay, we are. So I was just mentioning that he said, do it in the honor for of my father. So I said one explanation is it means Hillel, which is his great grandfather. This is Rabbi Gamliel wants forgiveness from Rabbi Yeshua. And so he's asking in the merit of my father, he means my great-great-grandfather Hillel. The other one is not Rabban Gamliel, his grandfather, it's Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. This is his father, who was one of the 10 martyrs that were murdered by the Roman government. In the merit of him, anyone that died al Kiddush Hashem, maybe in his merit, he was hoping to have Rabbi Yeshua forgive him, and Rabbi Yeshua did forgive him. And now came the question of how to deal with the fact that he was deposed. Rabbi Gamliel was deposed already, and they already hired someone else. So now, how are they gonna give Rabbi Gamliel back his position? So this is the story. This is we're gonna now read it inside. Amru, we are about 25 lines up from the bottom of the page. Amru, they said, Man Nazel v'leimalahu l'Rabbana. Who's going to go back and tell the rabbis to reinstate you, Rabbi Gamliel? Who should go back and tell them that you have been forgiven, that I forgave you? Amar lahu hahu kaives. There was a launderer that was there. And he said, Ana azilna, I will go. Shalach le Rabbi Yeshua levei medrasha. So Rabbi Yeshua sent with him the following words. He said, Man delavish mada yilbash mada. He said, like in a riddle. He said that announce in the base medrash, announce in the study hall, that the person who wears the robe should wear the robe. Uman deloy lavish mada, the person who doesn't wear the robe, yemer lei leman delavish mada, should he say to the one who wears the robe, shlach madcha vana albashe, remove your robe and I will wear it? The person who wears the robe, he should be the one to wear the robe. And another person shouldn't tell him to take off your robe and I'll wear it. And that means that Rabban Gamliel was the person who's from the tribe of Judah, who's meant to be the leader. He's from the tribe of Judah. He's from the right tribe. And he is meant to be the leader. He's meant to wear the robe of the kingship. And therefore, the Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah should not tell Rabbi Gamliel to take off your robe and I will wear it. So that was what he sent. He sent this like riddle to the poetic words to the Beis Medrash, and in order to tell the people that Rabban Gamliel was atoned for, that he forgave him. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva l'Rabbanan. Now in the Beis Medrash, Rabbi Akiva told the rabbis there, he said, Traiku Gali, lock the doors. That Rabbi Gamliel's servant shouldn't come and bother us. He's going to kvetch us to try to get him reinstated. He's going to bother us. So, let's lock the doors. So there are two understandings of this story. Either they locked the doors before the launderer came to tell them the message, so they never even heard that message, or they heard the message and they said, we got to get him out, lock the doors. We don't want we don't need any tsaros. So in any event, however it was, they wanted to sort of like wait and decide and deliberate in a timeful manner. They wanted to be able to timely manner. They didn't want to rush and put him back on before they made a decision, and therefore they said, let's lock the doors. So Rabbi Yeshua heard, and Amar Rabbi Yeshua mutav de'ekom ve'ezel ano. It's better if I go myself, l'gabayu, to them. Then they'll understand that that I want to have Rabbi Gamliel back in office. Also, he went. Taraf abava, he knocked on the door. Amar le Maza ben Maza Yaza. Again, he used the poetic words. He says, the person who sprinkles, the son of the one who sprinkles, Yaza, he should be the one to sprinkle. The one who doesn't, who's not from the family of sprinklers, whose father's not a sprinkler, should he tell the sprinkler, the son of the sprinkler, that your water is not really pure holy water? It's just water of a myra, the water of a cave, and your afer, your ashes are not ashes of the red heifer, but they're afer makla. They're just ashes of regular burnt cinders. Is that should a person who doesn't belong in office, should he be telling the other one that he's wrong? So therefore, Rabban Gamliel should get his job back. Amar le Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Yeshua nispayasta. So Rabbi Akiva asked Rabbi Yeshua, he said, were you appeased? So we did this all for your honor. If you want to give him back his job, tomorrow I and you will together go early to his door, and we will invite him back. Amri, they said, Heichi Navid, what should we do? Because now we already hired Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Navre, should we get rid of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? Gemiri, we have a rule that's known, accepted rule. Mylin Bakodesh. You elevate in matters of holiness. V'ein ma'ridin. We don't take someone down from matters of holiness. So once we hired Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, we can't really get rid of him. Nidrash mar chodashaita should shabsa. Should Nidrash Mar Chodesh Shabsa, Umar Chodesh Shabsa. Should one rabbi lead the community for 1 week, and the other rabbi lead the community for the other week? Also, l'knuye, there's going to be jealousy. Elo lidreish Rabbi Gamliel, Salasa Shabsi, Rabbi Gamliel will lead in Darshan for 3 weeks. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Chodesh Shabsa, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah will Darshan 1 Shabbos. And this is what they decided, that there'll be 3 weeks that Rabbi Gamliel will have the office, and since we can't get rid of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah once a month, once every 4 weeks, he will lead. He will be the person who gives the drasha, gives the sermon. So Vahainu diyamar mar, and that's what it means when it says when we have a statement in the Talmud that says Shabbos shel mi haisa. That one of the rabbis asked the other rabbi, whose Shabbos was it? And they answered, it's shel Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah haisa. It was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's Shabbos. So when the Talmud in Chagiga, Rashi tells us, it says over there that one of the rabbis asked the other one, whose Shabbos was it? What does that mean? Whose Shabbos was it? Well, there's no, only after you know this story do you understand what that means. That they used to ask whose week was it? Who darshan? Because who was the person who gave the lecture? Because there were some weeks that it was Rabbi Gamliel and some weeks that it was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So that's why they asked whose week was it, and they answered it was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's. Now, who was the student that made this whole problem in the first place? That said that that asked the question. He asked the same 2 rabbis the same question and started out the whole argument. He says, how did you say that it's a chayva? Rabbi Yeshua said it's a reshus. How did you, he told Rabbi Gamliel, how can you say, you're telling me that it's an obligation it's a obligation to daven Ma'ariv? It's really an optional to daven Ma'ariv. Because Rabbi Yeshua told me that. So he created the whole problem in the first place. Who was it? Shimon ben Yochai Haba. That student was Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. So it tells us who it was. Why does it tell us who it was? And why didn't it tell us who it was in the beginning? So there's a
What is the rabbi's name again? Rabbi Shimon?
Bar Yochai.
Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, the famous Rashbi, was known as Rashbi. He was famous for, he's buried in Meron. They make a whole celebration about him on Lag BaOmer. He was the author of the Zohar, a great rabbi. So it's interesting that he's the one who
incredible
was this.
Who started all this trouble.
But the deeper meaning behind it is he brought about ultimately peace. Because the trouble, the trouble had started was an ongoing trouble, as we see. There was a few times. It was not the first time that this situation was going on, and this brought about a change in the situation. So he ultimately brought it all to a nice ending, and so that's maybe why it doesn't say Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai's name in the beginning. And instead, it waits till the end, because when you see that it all came to a nice ending, then it says, now we can tell you who it is, so that you realize that it was Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Also, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is like the Kabbalist, known, the hidden, knows, brings out the hidden meaning of everything. And here, what he did was he was able to bring out and allow there to be peace, ultimate peace, by bringing out this whole situation, but ultimately bringing peace to the rabbis. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say it came out that it was a good ending for everybody, but that was not his intention. His intention was to know the answer to his question.
Well, we don't know what the deeper
Yes
meaning.
and no.
There is a commentary. I'm not sure if it's like the Ben Ish Chai or there is a commentary that did you speak to mommy? There is a commentary that mentions there is a commentary that mentions that Rabbi Gamliel might have had a judgment of penalty of death that should have affected him, and because he was humiliated, Rabbi Rashbi actually brought about that the punishment of death was removed because he was so humiliated so what looks like he did something bad. Rashbi brought about this humiliation. Really, what he did was good because he saved him from death. He saved Rabbi Gamliel from death by causing him this humiliation. I'd have to look up where
it sounds like
this is, but it's an interesting little insight. Okay, so in any event, the next Gemara talks about Musaf and the two opinions that we had in the Mishnah. So if you remember, the Mishnah spoke about the time for daven, and after it mentioned Shachris, Mincha, and then Ma'ariv, then it mentioned Musaf. In Musaf, it said that the opinion of the rabbis was that you can daven Musaf all day, Kol Hayoim. Rabbi Yehuda said you have until 7 hours of the day. And we explained that means you have until and including the 7th hour. That means on a day that's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., you have until 1 o'clock to daven Ma'ariv, because the 6th hour would be from 11 to 12, and the 7th hour would be from 12 to 1, and you have until and including the 7th hour, so you'd have till 1 o'clock to daven Musaf. Now, the Gemara is going to mention something that we spoke about earlier, that what happens if you have the ability to daven Mincha or Musaf at the same time, which one should you do? We spoke about this earlier, but here it's brought more as the main discussion of it. Earlier, we brought it to prove what the word ad means. We brought it as a side point. But now the Gemara discusses it a little more as this is more the main topic. So we're going to now start. We're 10 lines up from the bottom of the page, maybe 12 lines up from the bottom of the page. Amar Rabbi V'shel Musafin Kol Hayoim. It says, Musaf, you could daven all day. That was the statement of the rabbis. Amar Rabbi Yochanan B'nikra Pesheya. Rabbi Yochanan says, however, if you push it off to daven later in the day, you're called a Pesheya, someone who is negligent in not davening at the right time. You really should daven earlier. So even the rabbis who say you're allowed to daven all day, you're still considered that you didn't do the right thing. You were irresponsible. You should have really davened earlier, and by not davening earlier. So what it sounds like is Rabbi Yehuda says that if you miss the time of 1 o'clock, which is if you miss the finishing by the 7th hour, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, you cannot daven any longer. It's too late. According to the rabbis, you're called a paisheya. You're irresponsible. You were negligent, and you should have davened earlier. But if you didn't, you could still daven. So that's the argument. Can you still daven after the 7th hour, or can't you? So the Gemara Rabbi Yochanan says you're called a Pesheya. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis learned. If a person has both prayers in front of him, he has the prayer of Mincha and the prayer of Musaf, because again, we're speaking about, let's say, according to Rabbi Yehuda, so it's 12:30, and at 12:30, you could be davening both. You could either daven Mincha or Musaf, because a half hour after midday. So the question is, which one should you daven? You have both prayers in front of you. So the Gemara says, "Mispal shel mincha v'yacha kach mispal shel musaf." You should daven mincha first and then musaf, and the reason is shazu tedira v'zu eina tedira, because this is more usual. Mincha happens much more times a year. How many days a year do you daven mincha? Every single day, 365 days in a solar year, right? Every day you daven minchas every single day. How about musaf? Musaf is once a week. Musaf is 52 times plus the holidays, Rosh Chodesh. So maybe you make it 70, 80 times musaf. So you got, one is much more often. One you do every day, and the other you only do like once a week. So therefore, the one that you do more often, that is considered more honorable, and that should come first. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer Mispal Shel Musaf V'Yachkach Mispal Shel Mincha. Rabbi Yehuda argues. He says, you should really daven Musaf, and afterwards you should daven Mincha, because Shazu Mitzvah Iveres, Shazu Mitzvah Sheina Iveres. The Musaf, you're going to lose it. You don't have much time. 12:30. When's the deadline for Musaf? If you're able to daven both at the same time, that means that you only have a half hour, according to Rabbi Yehuda, to daven both. The other one is going to leave. The time for Musaf is going to be over, and you're not going to be able to daven it anymore. So once you finish, once you're going to, if you're going to daven Mincha first, you might lose out in Musaf. So he says, therefore, you should daven Musaf first, because this mitzvah is Oiveres. It's going to pass, and you're going to lose out in the opportunity to daven Musaf. Musaf is going to be over. Now, I will tell you, there's a very interesting question that Slach, that one of the commentaries brings over here. He says, now we hold you have all day to daven Musaf, right? Of course, you're best to daven it before the end of the 7th hour. But according to halacha, you have all day to daven Musaf until night. How long do you have to daven Mincha till? Mincha, if you miss, you could daven 2 Ma'arivs. Musaf, you can't. Once you miss Musaf, you can't daven 2 Ma'arivs. So he asks a question. Let's say it's almost dark. Should you daven Musaf because you're not going to be able to daven Musaf any later? It's going to be too late. Musaf, if you miss it, gets dark, goodbye. You're over. Should you daven Musaf? In Mincha, you'll daven 2 Ma'arivs. Or is it better for you to daven Mincha and lose out on Musaf? This is his question. So,
Rabbi,
the question boils down to the fact that now is the real time to daven Mincha. So should that come and push off Musaf, because now is the real time? This is the real proper time for Mincha is now. Musaf is over already. You're called a Pesheya. You're allowed to daven it, but the main time. So does this take precedence, or maybe the fact that you're going to lose out takes precedence over something that the time to pray is now? So it seems like there's an argument between the commentaries what to do in this scenario. Make sure not to fall into this trap. Yes, Ben.
how can you say that it's almost dark and you still didn't daven Musaf?
You forgot. you were part of your Kiddush club.
Oh,
You know, some
okay.
shuls have a Kiddush club and they forget to daven Musaf, those people.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. It was COVID. He didn't go to shul. The guy forgot about Musaf.
Can't read it.
Okay, please don't. So somehow we forgot to daven Musaf. Anyway, so that's an interesting question that the commentaries debate about. But in any event, the Gemara here has this argument: which one comes first, Musaf or Mincha? And we have an argument, the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the halacha is mispal shel Mincha, v'yacha kach mispal shel Musaf. The halacha is you daven Mincha, and afterwards you daven Musaf. So what is
which prayer comes? How do you get to that? That the Mincha prayer is before Musaf. How do you, only because it's in the Torah? That's how it's saying for you to do it first?
I'm not sure what you asked. You want to know what should you do first?
You're doing two different prayers. They're not
but you got to know which one to do first. What? They're both applicable.
Not together. In the prayer book, they're not together.
In the prayer book, are they together? What does that mean? They're together. They can't write both on the same page.
In the siddur that I have.
Yeah.
Aren't those prayers together?
I'm not sure what that means if they're together, but they're both printed in the siddur. Yes, they're in the siddur. Normally, in shul, you normally daven musaf first, because normally musaf, takes place before the time to daven mincha. So the norm is musaf comes first, but there could be a scenario where can you take her outside? Sorry about the noise, background noise. There is a scenario where you missed musaf, you didn't daven it earlier, and now it's time to daven both. You could daven mincha, you could daven musaf.
I understand. Now
in the practical, there are 2 days a year when this actually happens in shul. One day is Yom Kippur, and the other day is Simchas Torah. The 2 days that this practically happens in shul, where we're not sure what to do, is Yom Kippur and Simchas Torah, because in shul, Yom Kippur, with all the bidding and all the aliyahs, all the the long, very lengthy prayers, it ends up that musaf starts very late, so you end up davening musaf late, and it's time for minchas also. So you have to decide which one should you daven first. The same thing as Simchas Torah, the busy dancing, the hakafas, and the dancing with the Torahs. And a lot of shuls, they make Kiddush first as well. So by the time it comes to Musaf, it's already time for Mincha. So there you have two scenarios where it actually is a practical. And the halacha that we mentioned a while back, in the earlier time when this was discussed, we mentioned that when it comes to an individual, there you have this question. And the conclusion is you should actually daven Mincha before Musaf. But when it comes to a congregation, we don't do that. When it comes to a congregation, you always daven musaf first. That was the conclusion. But anyway, the Gemara here says that halacha mispal mincha v'yachach mispal musaf. You daven mincha, and then afterwards you daven musaf, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan says. Now I will tell you that Tosfos over here mentions that this doesn't always apply because he says it only applies when you're stuck for time, you're pressed for time, you're not going to be able to daven later, and so you need to daven both now. So then you have a question, which one to do first? And we say you got to do the usual one first. But if you're not pressed for time and you're going to be able to daven mincha later, you do not need to daven mincha first, because you can daven it later. There's no problem. it's the problem is when you're going to be going to some event like a wedding, and now you're going to have to daven both. So you have to daven both. Then you got to decide which one to do first. But if they're not happening right now, you're not ready to daven mincha now. You're not planning on davening mincha now. You don't have to. We don't say this one comes first. It only comes first when you're going to be doing both right now. It doesn't come first. The one that's more usual takes precedence when you're about to do both. But when you're really not ready to do both, you don't have to give the precedence to the one that's more usual. Then it doesn't take precedence because you're not deciding which one to do first because you're planning on doing the other one later anyway. So in other words, that's one way that's the way Tosfos sees it. The Tosfos on the side over here, he mentions that. But I don't know if the other commentaries, I don't know if that's brought in halacha. The general understanding, I think, in halacha is that you would daven mincha first and then musaf if you were on your own, if you were an individual. Okay, the Gemara continues and it says, Reb Zera ki have a cholish migirse, when he was weak from studying, have a ozol v'yosef apischa devei Reb Nosson bar Tuvi. He was going and sitting at the Beis Medrash, at the entrance of the Beis Medrash or Reb Nosson bar Tuvi. So he sort of couldn't study anymore. He had a headache, or he was weak, so he needed to take a little break. So he went outside and he sat at the entrance of the Beis Medrash of Reb Nosson bar Tuvi. Omar, he said, Ki chalfi rabbanon oz eka mikamayu. When the rabbis leave, I will stand up, ba'kabel agra. I will receive reward. I will get a reward for standing up. In other words, I can't study Torah, so let me at least stand up for the rabbis. So I'll sit outside the Beis Medrash. When they come, I'm going to stand up. I'll get a reward for that. So that's what he did. Nafak, Asa Reb Nosson bar Tuvi. Reb Nosson bar Tuvi came, and Amar Lei Man, Amar Lei, he said to him, Reb Nosson bar Tuvi came out and said to him, Man Amar Halacha Bei Medrasha, who said that in the Beis Medrash that the halacha follows Reb Yehuda. Amar Lei Hachi Amar Reb Yochanan. This is what he said. This is what Reb Yochanan said. Ein halacha to Reb Yehuda. The halacha doesn't follow Reb Yehuda. The Amar Maspal Adam Shal Musa V'Yachach Maspal Shal Mincha. That Reb Yehuda said that you daven Musa first and afterwards Mincha. The halacha does not follow him. Amar Lei Reb Yochanan Amra. Amar Lei, he said to him, Reb Yochanan Amra, did Reb Yochanan say this? Amar Lei in, he said, yes, Reb Yochanan said this. So again, Rabbi Zera was weak. He was sitting outside, and who came out? Reb Nosson bar Tuvi. Reb Nosson bar Tuvi came out, and he said to him, who says the halacha follows Reb Yehuda? He says, no, we don't actually follow Reb Yehuda. Reb Yochanan said that the halacha follows the other opinion, that you don't daven musaf and then mincha, you do the opposite. So he said, who said? Did Reb Yochanan say? He said, yes. So Tana Minei Arbon Zivnin. So he learned it, he reviewed it 40 times. So he said to him, you're reviewing it so many times. Why? Is this the first time you ever heard something in the name of Reb Yochanan? Or is it is it something new that you didn't know? Are you reviewing it because this is unique that you've never heard something in the name of Reb Yochanan? Or is it and therefore you cherish it? Or is it because it's something new to you that you're afraid that you thought someone else said it, and you're afraid you're not gonna remember Reb Yochanan said it because your mind is thinking that someone else said it, therefore you got to review it a lot of times so it gets into your memory that it's Reb Yochanan. So Amar Lei Chodas Hili, It is new to me. I thought someone else said it. Mishum de Besafkali, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. I thought Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said it. And therefore, I'm reviewing it 40 times so that I'll get rid of the mistaken, my mistaken thought that Rabbi Yeshua said it, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and really it's Rabbi Yochanan. So that's the end of this Gemara, that the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda in regard to this matter. Instead, it follows the other opinion that you do with daven mincha first and then musaf.